Week 0 has come and gone, and here we are on Wednesday, August 27th, the eve of Week 1. We have games starting tomorrow, Thursday night, most notably with USF and Boise State. Going to be watching that one for sure. Got Nebraska and Cincinnati later Thursday night. But Week 1 is upon us, and it feels like chaos is coming. Maybe it's just because it's Week 1 and we don't have any idea what's going to happen, but right now it feels like we're in for a season of pure panic or chaos or whatever you want to call it. It's not going to be an easy, oh, there's the elite team. We know who's going to win the national championship by Week 4, but we are going to have a lot of fun anyways. So without further ado, let's get in. We got Week 1 predictions today. Going to touch on the results of Farmageddon and what teams are on upset alert. I will let you know. There is no better place to start than in Columbus, Ohio. Week 1, Texas at Ohio State, 11 a.m. kickoff. It's going to be the big noon game. I hate the fact that this is an 11 a.m. kickoff. I wish this was a night game, but I also like the fact that it gives me the opportunity to put more of my focus on LSU and Clemson later that evening. But Ohio State, we are, and some of this, if you've listened to the pod before, going to kind of touch on go over some things I've talked about in the offseason, but 101, these teams are really similar. It's really hard to predict this game. I'm just going to put that out there right now. But Ohio State, you are 101 in returning production. You had 14 players drafted in the NFL draft. You had all 4 defensive line starters drafted. You had 3 defensive backs, 2 O-linemen, 2 running backs, a couple linebackers, and you had your QB1, Will Howard. Obviously, he is being replaced with Julian Sayin, but you also are replacing both coordinators. This is about as much turnover as you could have with having the same head coach. You're losing a lot of production, both coordinators. It's almost like there was a coaching change. That's how much turnover we have at Ohio State this year. Chip Kelly, the offensive coordinator, he's gone. Brian Hartline was promoted there to be the new offensive coordinator. Defensive coordinator Jim Knowles notably left for Penn State, and he was replaced by Matt Patricia, big NFL guy. So let's see. Julian Sayin, new quarterback. What is his floor this season? Where does it start? So I think that he's going to be a great quarterback. Everyone talks about how he was Nick Saban's guy. That's who Nick Saban hand-selected to be his new quarterback at Alabama. The only reason he's at Ohio State is because Saban retired. That's all fine, but where is his floor, this ceiling? Is it good enough to lift Ohio State past the expectations that they have year in and year out? Ohio State is coming off of the number 1 total defense in 2024. Now, you're losing your defensive coordinator, a lot of talent on that side of the ball. How far do you fall from that number 1 spot? Because you're probably not going to have the number 1 total defense this year again, but that doesn't mean you have to have the 120th total defense this year. So how far do you fall? Are you still in the top 20? Because if you're still in the top 20, that's going to make games like this a lot more manageable. Same thing with offense. You had the 30th ranked overall offense last year. How far do they fall? Or do they rise? You can't rise on defense from number 1, but on offense, is it possible for them to rise? Probably a better quarterback than you had last year. He's just green. He's not experienced like Will Howard was. Jeremiah Smith is still there, so he's going to have probably one of the top 5, if not the best wide receiver in the country to throw the ball to. So that's quick preview on Ohio State. Texas, very similar, 103rd in returning production. Draft picks, a lot of them, 12 players to the NFL, 3 on the O-line, 3 on the D-line, 2 defensive backs. You had a wide receiver drafted, a running back, your tight end, and obviously Quinn Ewers, your quarterback. Arch Manning, that is the name for Texas. I'm sure no one is a stranger to that name at this point. If you are, I don't know what to tell you. You need to pay more attention to college football. But Arch Manning, obviously, big X factor for Texas. How's that defense going to be? Are they going to take a step forward into that number 1 spot that Ohio State will be vacating? Now, Texas has Colin Simmons off the edge, Anthony Hill at linebacker, Michael Taft on the back end. They've got elite players at all levels of the defense. They've got the interior lineman, Murad Watson, that transferred in. A lot's going to be expected of him this year. Reliable running backs and wide receivers need to step up. We're going to have Ryan Ween go back. He needs to be that clear wide receiver one this year. The O-line for Texas, bit of a question mark as it is for Ohio State, although it is more of a question for Texas as they lost more, most notably that left tackle, Kelvin Banks, to the NFL. You know, whenever you have that kind of setup, you could win or lose games where only 21 total points are scored because you have an elite defense, but your offense, you just struggle because maybe your O-line isn't getting it done for you. I don't care how good the quarterback is. If the O-line can't block, they can't block. He can't work. So Arch Manning is going to be a big factor in this game for Texas. Obviously, he's going to be very good, most likely, although he has not played. So let's stop right there. He is number 1 in Heisman odds going into this season, which is crazy. Arch Manning has developed is about as good as a quarterback could develop. He's had as much time, more than usual, to develop. Julian Sayin has had a lot too. He sat last year, developed in the wing. Arch Manning has been doing that under Quinn Ewers for the past 2 years. So by all accounts, that's gone, extraordinarily well. You couldn't ask for a better, transition from high school to college with that, that pressure not building right out of the gate. Although the pressure that has built up in the last 2 years is far greater than many quarterbacks will ever experience in their life. But with that being said, how does he play when the lights are on? There is no substitute. I don't care how many snaps you take in practice or how well you do in fall camp. There's no substitute for that 11 a.m. kickoff when the lights come on in Columbus, Ohio. That is something that we're going to find out this Saturday. Same goes for Julian Sayin. How does he play when the lights are on against a fierce defense that's going to be coming after him from the rip? Now, I almost wonder if there's a bit of a factor with Julian Sayin. I've always kind of wondered this. If I had played football, at a higher level, more competitively, then I would probably know the answer. But it's a question I'd like to ask. When you have a quarterback who hasn't more so Julian Sayin in this case, everyone looks at a home game like, oh, a home game. It's, easier to play there than on the road for the offense. That's what you think, right? Well, if it's almost, I wonder if it's sometimes for a green quarterback, if they go out there and you're on your own home field, if the pressure's almost higher than it is on the road. Because on the road, it's almost like there's 100,000 people here and they all hate me. Screw them. I'm going to play. But at home, it's like, oh, there's 100,000 people here. I really need to, I need to come through so that I can perform in front of my home crowd. I wonder if there's almost a higher level or maybe just a different kind of pressure at a home game for a young quarterback like that. So let's not just put that home field advantage, all on Ohio State whenever they have a young quarterback coming in. So, like I said, both Arch and Julian Sayin are very hyped. I think that they're almost so hyped that we could have a relatively jaw-dropping result, like a blowout either way. Because if Texas comes in here and they lay an egg and Arch throws for 130 with 2 picks or something, like it's going to be a shocking result. Same thing goes for Julian Sayin. I expect a competitive game, but these teams are going to need all 3 phases. I think the team that wins the field position battle is going to probably be the team that wins the game. I'm talking like if your average length of field is 45 yards and you can keep your opponent's average length of field to, say, 70 yards, that gives you a massive advantage in a game where these teams are so, so even in so many spots around the field. Offensive line, very even. Defensive line, pretty even, I would say, but maybe the edge to Texas with Colin Simmons coming off the edge. The secondary, I would trust. I think Texas is more proven, probably on the back end. But you do have Caleb Downs, obviously, on the side of the Buckeyes. So the point spread for this game is Ohio State minus 2.5. The over-under is 47.5. So I have gone back and forth on this game multiple times a day, every day for the last week since I really started looking at it, and it is just tough to predict because we have very similar circumstances littered across both teams. Like I said, A lot of replacement on the O-line and on the D-line, new quarterbacks. Running backs are going to have to be leaned on more. New wide receivers on both sides. It's tough to find which team has an edge. But I do think that the continuity at the coaching positions, the defensive and offensive coordinator continuity that Texas has coming into this game gives them a massive edge that is not to be overlooked. It's not easy to go and win a national championship, replace that many players, and do it with new coordinators. That's tough. So I think Texas has the edge when it comes to the coaching staff. I think Texas has the edge when it comes to the defensive line, which the line of scrimmage in this game is obviously going to be where the game is won or lost. I think Texas, it's hard to say that they have the edge when it comes to quarterback, but Arch has been around college a little bit longer. He's had a little bit more experience. He's had a little bit more reps in practice, fall camps. This isn't his first time going through it. So, I initially wrote down Ohio State, but I am changing that. I am picking Texas to win this football game. I do not think it's going to be a crazy high-scoring game one way or the other. Ohio State winning would not surprise me, but I think Texas, the number one team in the country as the AP has them, I think they're going to go into Columbus, Ohio and win that football game on Saturday, and it will be off to the races. There will be the hype around Texas and Arch Manning for the next 3 weeks as they play their cupcakes is going to be like nothing. It's going to be insufferable. Let's just say it there. Although with playing cupcakes 3 weeks in a row, they may kind of fade if other crazy things happen until they go into the swamp. So, yeah, like I said, if you disagree, let me know why. If you have a point or a score prediction, let me know on X at Campus Pigskin. But let's move on because we've got a game on Friday night to talk about. Friday night standalone matchup, Auburn at Baylor, a big SEC versus Big 12 game to open up the season. One of the games I'm most excited for all weekend. I can hardly wait. I'm shaking, ready for this game. So let's start with the home team, Baylor. They are returning Sawyer Robinson at quarterback. Last year, he's a 3,000-yard passer, 28-8 touchdown to INT ratio. You also have Bryson Washington at running back. He ran for over 1,000 yards last year, 12 touchdowns, averaged 5.9 yards per carry. We've got Josh Cameron and Ashton Hawkins at the two wide receivers coming back from last year. 754 yards and 10 touchdowns, 567, 5 touchdowns. Wealth spread pretty evenly between those two. Baylor had last season the 20th total offense and the 87th total defense. I expect that defense to improve more so this year with Dave Aranda behind the wheel there. So, where do these two units shake out? The offense, I think the offense is primed probably for another top 50 season. Top 25 would be great. Last year, like I said, the 20th ranked total offense. If they could be in that ballpark again this season, hell of a chance they have to win this game. Now, like I said, for defense, I think Dave Aranda is probably going to elevate that defense even farther ever since he took control last season. I think that you would expect him to probably be put a top 50 defense out on the field, if not better, this year. You have a year 2 offensive coordinator, Jake Spartanell, coming in. I think you need to make Auburn respect the run and kill them through the air if you're Baylor in this game. But Auburn, let's talk about them for a second. What is Jackson Arnold's ceiling? And not just what is it for the season, but in this case, what is it to start the game? How high does his floor elevate, if any, compared to last season? Because if they want to win games like this, they're going to have to, or he's going to have to. Hugh Freeze and Jackson Arnold, they really need to work to refine his game, be more consistent. He's obviously got a lot of raw talent, but he just, they need some refinement there. Obviously, Cam Coleman, great target for him to throw the ball to, probably a top 5 wide receiver in college football this year. However, Auburn does lose Jarquez Hunter. You have a new backfield. Last year for Auburn, the story was turnover margin. They're 119th in the country in turnover margin. You did have a pretty damn good defense, though. You had the 31st ranked total defense. Just for reference, Georgia was ranked 30th overall in defense last year. And you did have the 29th ranked total offense last year for Auburn. Now, it's crazy to hear those numbers and say, how did we lose as many games as we lost? And it's because of what I said, that turnover margin. If you take a 50,000-foot view of this matchup, I think that Baylor has more proven offensive pieces than Auburn, but I think Auburn's might be more talented. I think Auburn, you're going to put a tough defense out on the field again, although there are times that DJ Durkin 3 down front seems to let a lot of balls be caught through the air, inexplicably so. Baylor, I think the defense obviously needs to improve there to compete in this game, and I think it will. Auburn and Jackson Arnold, you need to click right off the rip here. We don't have time to piddly dick around against Eastern, Carolina or whatever. We have Baylor, and they have a very good defense they're going to put on the field. I think that Baylor is going to win a close game. Not Baylor, Auburn. I think if it's a close game, Baylor wins. I think Auburn probably wins a more high-scoring game, but the point spread is Auburn minus 2.5, over under 58.5. I think Auburn is going to win this game. And I think it's going to be kind of just a classic Jimmy's and Joe's beat X's and O's type of win. I think you're going to see what Baylor's doing on defense. That's probably going to confuse Jackson Arnold frequently, maybe even has some turnovers, but they just can't get home because that offensive line is just bigger and better than that defensive line. Same thing on the other side. I think that, you're probably going to see Sawyer Robinson throw the ball, put up some good numbers through the air, but Auburn's Jimmy's and Joe's just make one more play than you do, and it results in them winning the game. So I would not be surprised at all if Baylor wins this game. The line is very thin for Auburn, but like I said, I think Jimmy's and Joe's here beat X's and O's. So after a wild Saturday, we will have a Notre Dame at Miami Sunday night. So let's get into that. Notre Dame. So as we know, we have a starting quarterback finally. C.J. Carr will be the starter for Notre Dame, former 4-star recruit. You're also returning Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Jeremiah Love, quick refresher, ran for 1,125 yards last year, 17 touchdowns, 6.9 yards per carry. Jadarian Price, 746 yards and 7 touchdowns last season, 6.2 per carry. Notre Dame had the 11th total defense last season. Obviously, most notably, they lost in the national championship game, but they did make it to the last game of the season. You return a couple pieces on defense, 2 corners, 2 linebackers, a D lineman. You were number 1 in defensive touchdowns in 2024, so that's pretty good, right? I think Notre Dame has better wide receivers last year than they did. I think you will have better wide receivers this year than you did last year. You're returning to Jaden Greathouse. You also have transfer Malachi Fields coming in with back-to-back 800-yard seasons. I think Notre Dame is, they're in a good spot this year, but how good of a spot are they with that new quarterback? With Miami, on the other hand, you have Carson Beck transferring in from Georgia to start at quarterback. You have 3 returning offensive starters, though. All of them are on the offensive line, so that is some positive news. You have 5 returning from the defensive side of the ball. You had a top 5 transfer class. You averaged the average 9th ranked recruiting class in the country the last 3 years. So Miami has been stacking talent. You had a great transfer class, but last year the story was the defense, or a lack thereof it. Miami lost games on defense. They forced the offense to work so much harder than they had to because of the bad defense. So that needs to improve. So for Notre Dame, C.J. Carr cannot be detrimental to Notre Dame's goals in this matchup. Just do your job and don't turn over the ball. We don't need him to go out and light it up, throw for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns to win this game. We just need him to stay on schedule and let Jeremiah Love run it down the throat of Miami. For Miami, do you have an answer for Notre Dame's rushing attack? And is your pass game improved from last year? Fortunately, I don't think you're going to be too much of a victim to them throwing all over you. But if they find out they can, then that story could change. What you have to worry about is that Notre Dame rushing attack. And like I said, do you have an answer for it? Because they've got two premier running backs, potentially one of the best in the country, top 3 at least. You got to answer. You got to stop the run if you want to have a shot to win this football game. Miami, you have some uncertainty on top of the defense and the secondary. You have a lot of uncertainty at wide receiver. You have uncertainty at running back. And it's going to be tough because Carson Beck has not been able to throw the ball really in official practice settings with those receivers up here until fall camp, as he was recovering from that injury most of the offseason. So a lot of people look at this game, and I understand why, and I think they just look too long at it. Miami, a lot of talent. It's just that there's some holes that have littered the roster every year. While they overall are very talented, there's just always been a weak spot that costs them games, and I think that will continue. I think Miami is going to be a good team this year, but it seems like a quick answer for me. I think Notre Dame is going to win this football game. They are favored by 2.5 points. The over-under is 49.5. I just don't think Miami is going to be able to answer for Jeremiah Love, and I think that C.J. Carr will probably be able to get what he needs to get done through the air, unless there is just a crazy step up in defense on that secondary side. But like I said, I think Notre Dame is going to win this game outright, fairly, not easily, but I think the score is going to be a touch lopsided. They're going to go into that bye week and start getting ready for Texas A&M week 3. Just want to take a quick second and say thank you for listening to this episode of the College Football Podcast. I really appreciate it. Make sure you follow me on X at Campus Pigskin, like on YouTube, subscribe, follow the podcast where, if you're on that side of this. But, I've been doing about 1 a week or so, but next week planning to start doing 2 a week with, reactions, reaction pods at the beginning of the week, prediction pods at the end of the week. So make sure you follow so you don't miss an episode. Alabama at Florida State, 2:30 Central for me, at least. That's where I am, Central Time, which is the best window to watch college football in, by the way. So, most notably, Florida State, last year 2-10. Got to mention that one more time. Alabama 9-3. Both teams missed the playoff, to be clear. So, let's look at this. Alabama comes into this game starting a new quarterback, Ty Simpson. Jam Miller is out to start the season, but he should be back by SEC play. That was projected to be their starting running back, but you do have Ryan Williams at receiver, still most notable, 4 years old. So, new quarterback, elite receiver. I think Alabama is set up there. You have 8 defensive starters returning. You had the 21st overall defense in 2024. You're returning your defensive coordinator, Caden Womack. You have Ryan Grubb at offensive coordinator, back with DeBoer after his stint in Seattle in the NFL. You've averaged the number 2 recruiting class the last 3 years. So, like some of these teams, the story with Bama is the same, stacking talent on talent on talent. Obviously, one of the best teams in the country talent-wise. Can that translate to the field since it did not last year? Alabama, the new start, I think that this is a pretty good starting point for Ty Simpson because of, all due respect, because of Florida State's kind of transition or recovery year after that 2-10 season. It would be a lot harder for him if he had to go into Ohio State week 1 or at Michigan week 1 probably, or at Georgia week 1. So a pretty good, it's going to be a hostile environment to start on the road. He's going to get his feet wet pretty quick in that. But for Florida State, you've got that transfer from Boston College to start for you at quarterback this year, Thomas Castellanos, who's been awfully chatty this offseason, really hyping up the the fans there and the team. So interested to see what he has to offer. Could this be another kind of like Vanderbilt game, where the quarterback just, I don't know. You don't want that. You don't want him to run and be getting beat up and hit all day at, against Alabama, but if that's how you're going to win the game, that's how you're going to win the game if you're Florida State. 23 incoming transfers, and you had the 36th overall ranked class. So, not great there, but obviously you had to kind of clean house after last season. New offensive coordinator Gus Malzahn, new defensive coordinator Tony White. Obviously, you're replacing both coordinators after, I don't want to keep saying it, but after that horrible season last year. 18th total defense at Nebraska last year for Tony White. You have 6 starters returning, 1 on offense, 5 on the defensive side of the ball. I think that this is just kind of this is a transition year. This is almost, I want to say it's kind of like year 0. How new staffs come in and everyone, they come in year 1, but sometimes they're just coming into such a bad situation that you want to say it's year 0, and that almost is the case for Florida State. That's almost how I want to put it. The problem is that this is not year 0 or year 1 for Mike Norvell. So being several years in and calling it year 0 is a tough pill to swallow. I'm not going to waste too much of your time. I think that Florida State's going to be better this year. They're going to be relatively fun to watch at quarterback, but Alabama is just more talented. Alabama is better coached. I'll admit I have relatively zero ability to predict Florida State. There's just anyone who is essentially guessing. Yeah, there's, bits and pieces we can put together and get, kind of a realistic picture, but with all that turnover, with how things went, this is just such a unique situation. I just think Alabama wins big. The line is Bama minus 13.5. I think they cover that, no problem. 50.5 is the over-under point total if you're curious. Probably would take the over on that. I could see this being a 42 to 17 game, something like that. So I think Bama's going to win big. I think that Ty Simpson is probably going to maybe get a little bit bigger of a hype train rolling for himself than he needs to. I think he's going to light things up through the air, and people are going to start to talk about him maybe in that, Heisman conversation this early in the season, just because of how well he's probably going to throw the ball is kind of what I expect. But as the season goes on and he, struggles against better teams, just naturally, I think that'll kind of quiet down. But, other than that, pretty simple, I think, coming into week 1 for this game. I'm going to get to LSU Clemson next for predictions, but I do want to take a quick break from predictions to kind of touch on the Iowa State-Kansas State game from week 0. I thought that going into that game that Iowa State needed to stop Kansas State's run game and force Avery Johnson to throw the ball through the air to win, and that's kind of how it played out. But, let's just quickly touch on these stats here. So Rocco Becht threw for, he was 14 for 28, threw for 183 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 rushing, or 2 through the air, 1 rushing, so a total of 3 touchdowns from him. Avery Johnson actually threw the ball better. He was 21 for 30, 273 through the air, 2 touchdowns passing, and also a touchdown rushing. Iowa State's rushing as a team, 46 carries, 130 yards, 2.8 yards per carry. Kansas State's rushing 27 carries, 110 yards, 4.1 yards per carry. So averaged out per carry, you got them there, but you didn't rush, for as many yards as Iowa State. So you did kind of do your job there a little bit if you're Iowa State's defense. Forced Avery Johnson to throw through the air, which he did well. Both teams had 2 turnovers, as we saw, that muffed punt, and then, and then Iowa State fumbles the pitch, and then it's just fumbles all over the place. It was farmageddon for a while, but that was fun to watch. Keys to the game, though, I think the story for the result lies in the 4th down penalties, or not 4th down and penalties. So on 4th down, Iowa State was 3 for 3. Kansas State was 1 for 4. So there is several drives where they ended in Kansas State. They probably, they went for it on 4th down. Maybe they should have kicked a field goal when you look at it in hindsight, but they went for it on 4th down, only made it 1 of those 4 times. Iowa State was able to prolong their possession by obtaining those first downs on fourth. That's a big factor of the score here. Iowa State 1 penalty for 5 yards. Kansas State 6 penalties for 48 yards. Obviously, that's going to play into this whenever whenever you have that many more penalties for that much more yardage and you're not converting on fourth down. Time of possession, Iowa State 33:52, Kansas State 26:08. So bit of a gap there, but not crazy. So really, like I said, just lies on the fourth down conversions and penalties for these two teams. Iowa State was able to prolong their drive, score 3 more points than Kansas State was. Both of these teams played very similar. It was nasty conditions, especially in the first half. It was a lot more fun to watch in the second half, but I don't know. I like a good, nasty battle on defense too. Both defenses played downhill pretty well. But I think that Iowa State, this game was huge for head-to-head, huge, because I don't think either of these teams, it's hard to tell week 0, we're not going to know till we're, halfway through the season if one of these teams is just terrible or if both of them are terrible. But as of right now, both of these teams, I think, still are contenders for the Big 12 championship game. This head-to-head, however, for Iowa State is going to be huge if it comes down to it. So they do have the edge up there. Kansas State, you're going to have to perform very well. It's going to be hard for you. This obviously is a conference loss, so you don't want to drop any more of those. And you've got some tough matchups still on the schedule. So going to be a little bit more thread the needle situation for Kansas State. Iowa State, you can breathe a little easier now. You got this one out of the way. You got out of Ireland with a W. The big thing here for both teams is hangover. I don't think it needs to be brushed over, the fact that they're coming back from Ireland. There's going to be jet lag. It's weird. It's going to kind of be a short week coming into this week. You don't want that to roll over into this week with a loss. You don't want that loss to turn into another one for either one of these teams. It's going to be, tough. It's, whether or not both these teams win this week, it's going to be tough to do it. So if you're a fan of either one of those teams, if you're on that team, you got to stay focused. It's going to be, it's going to be a battle this week, but they'll get through it. So really fun game to watch, though. Great appetizer week 1. There was some of the other stuff that happened. Dan Mullen was getting pushed there by Idaho State, so there was almost some chaos that ensued out in Las Vegas this weekend. But he pulled the plane up just in the nick of time and was able to get out of there with a win as well. So dare I say Kansas is the best team in the state this year? I don't know. Would I be crazy to say that? Maybe. Will I say it? Yes, I will. Let's say it. But until further notice, we'll just say Kansas is the best team in the state. So, oh well. All right, let's keep that prediction train rolling. We've got LSU at Clemson, night game in Death Valley. Which one? The one in South Carolina. So, LSU, the visiting team here. Garrett Nussmeier, returning quarterback. Last year threw for 4,000 yards. Touchdown to INT ratio is a little, you want that to be a little bit better. 29 touchdowns, not bad, but you threw 12 interceptions. So you really got to improve on that end. Caden Durham at running back. Harlan Berry, former 5-star also. Caden Durham last year went for 753, 6 touchdowns, 5.4 per carry. Harlan Berry, he was, like I said, former 5-star, didn't play last year. He's incoming this season. Wide receiver, going to be big here for LSU. You got Aaron Anderson and Nick Anderson. You also have, you've got them this year, 884 yards and 5 touchdowns last year for Aaron Anderson. Nick Anderson is expected to be a pretty key contributor there. Obviously, you lost Kyron Lacey. May he rest in peace, a former wide receiver from last year. Mason Taylor to the NFL. Your center is the only returning starter from that offensive line for LSU. So for LSU, last year, you're 61st in total defense, 25th in total offense. So that defense, while it did improve last year, it was not improved enough. You had the 73rd total red zone offense as well, and the 19th total red zone defense. So you also didn't do too hot on offense in the red zone. That was kind of the story last year for LSU. For Clemson, however, number one in returning production in the country, famously from last season, obviously ACC champion, made it to the playoffs, the first 12-team round, lost to Texas, however. You bring back Cade Klubnik, 3 wide receivers, you bring back your left tackle, your center, both of the guys right of the center, your guard and your tackle on that side. You bring back 3 guys on the D-line, a couple linebackers, a couple corners, safety. Like I said, number one in the country returning production. Great, players all over the place. Cade Klubnik, very, very good quarterback here. 3,639 yards passing last year. 36-6 on the touchdown to INT ratio. He also rushed for 463 yards for 7 touchdowns, so he can move with his legs as well. Last year for Clemson, 6 receivers had more than 200 yards receiving, and 7 had multiple TD games. Spread the wealth for Clemson. There is some very good receivers on this offense. You had the number 11th total offense last year. However, you did have the 69th total defense, so you need to improve there. Last year on your red zone offense ranked 49th, your red zone defense ranked 51st. So, what is this game going to look like? Well, some of the stuff from LSU's fall camp about the offensive line, not a lot of promising intel coming out about that O-line. Maybe it's just gamesmanship, but it seems, the starters that LSU lost on the O-line last year are going to show here. I think even that line last year that was I think is going to be easy to say it was better than what we're going to see this year. It still did not necessarily, I don't think, live up to expectations even last year. So I think LSU has a weaker offensive line here. I don't want to hate on Garrett Nussmeier, but I do kind of favor Cade Klubnik over Nussmeier whenever you're looking at quarterbacks here. So I'll take Clemson's O-line. I'll take Clemson's quarterback. I think the receivers, LSU may have an edge there, but it's closer to a stalemate at receiver. Running backs, I would say, probably a stalemate too. Very similar in that area. On the defensive side, however, LSU has talent on the line of scrimmage defensively, but I think Clemson's, you're just older, more veteran, more proven production there. Same thing in the line, not for the linebackers. I think LSU, obviously you've got Whit Weeks, Harold Perkins there, who's going to be playing the star position. So you've got some good backers there on LSU's, side of the ball for defense. On the secondary, I think Clemson, this is where Clemson takes, wins that head-to-head kind of battle as the secondaries. Again, proven returning veterans on that side of the ball in the secondary. So LSU relying on a lot of transfers. So that's not necessarily something you want to see from a team like LSU. They need to have defensive progression here, obviously. Can they do it with all of those incoming transfers? You are, like I said, returning Whit Weeks and Harold Perkins, and that is a big deal. But really, how do the new receivers pan out? A lot of hype on them for sure, but they still need to prove it. Can Clemson simply just get better? Can they just keep doing what they're doing? Can they just, as a unit, as a team, I hate the whole just take the next step phrase, but can they just get a little bit better everywhere? Can every person, every starter at their position just do a little better than they did last year? I think collectively that would be, enough to go win them a national championship. And that's kind of what I think will happen. But will they win this game? Let's find out. So great offense, great defense for Clemson. I think that the line at 3.5, that's not bad. It's favored, Clemson is favored by, like I said, 3.5. I think that would maybe be a little bigger. I like it closer to 5. Over under 57.5. I think Clemson is going to win this game. I think with the home field advantage is, obviously going to play a role here, night game there in Clemson, South Carolina. I think they have the better quarterback. They're relying on homegrown defensive talent, and LSU is rebuilding an offensive line. LSU is rebuilding a secondary still. We haven't seen that defense pop yet. I think they'll probably have a better year this year, but it's still TBD. And I think week 1, they're just not going to be up to the task. and I think that Clemson is going to take the season opener from LSU, who has not won one since 2019, most as we all know. But maybe one of these years they'll win, but I think that obviously that puts the pressure on LSU for the next several games and for the season is winning or is losing another season opener. Clemson, I think after this game, it's kind of off to the races. I think you're going to run through the ACC and make the playoff. So, like I said, Clemson wins. Brian Kelly hot seat. It's going to be all over the place come Sunday, but it is what it is. Got a few more games to touch on here. I'm just going to kind of go rapid fire. Got Georgia Tech playing at Colorado this weekend. Georgia Tech, high ACC expectations. I'm expecting them to be conference and playoff contender. Colorado obviously replacing a lot of production. Caden Salter is the starting quarterback there. That was confirmed this week. My biggest question about Colorado is what is the identity of that team? The head coach, Deion Sanders, he had some health problems over the offseason, and he just wasn't there a lot. I'm not blaming him for that. I'm not hating on Deion Sanders. I'm not blaming him for being absent. But in the absence of that head man, that leader, who is that team forming an identity around? And does that clash whenever Deion Sanders comes back into the building? That's the biggest question I have about Colorado, shy of their returning production, obviously. But Georgia Tech is favored by 4.5. I think that number is too low. I favor them more by 7, probably. Over-under is 52.5. I think Georgia Tech is going to easily win this football game this weekend. Utah at UCLA. I think it's going to be a big bounce-back year for Utah. You got a new offensive coordinator, Jason Beck, and his quarterback, Devin Damper, both coming from New Mexico. Got an OC-QB combo there for Utah. UCLA, obviously, Nico Iamaleava coming in. I think you're obviously still transitioning from that, from the Chip Kelly era. What is the identity of this team going to be this year? Utah is favored by 5.5, 51.5 on the over/under. That point spread probably sounds right. I think it's going to be a closer game, but I think Utah is going to come out on top here. Virginia Tech at South Carolina. South Carolina, 9 returning starters. You obviously got Lenore Sellers back there at quarterback, Nick Harbor out at wide receiver, and Dylan Stewart on the edge. Some of the great players in college football this season. Virginia Tech, you are returning your quarterback, but it's, Virginia Tech, you're still kind of wandering in the abyss. I'm not going to put too much on you yet. I am looking forward to kind of the bounce back year for Tech there, but right now, USC favored by 7.5. 52.5 is the over-under. Sounds right. I think South Carolina wins this game comfortably. But that's all the games I'm going to predict for this week. So let's wrap this up with who's on upset alert. Every week we're going to go through and see what teams should be on upset alert. Going to start this week. Auburn, I think you are on upset alert, and there is a high potential for an upset here. You are favored by a slim margin against Baylor, but I think beyond that, the competitive pressure, the job pressure there at Auburn this year, winning or losing on the road as an SEC team against the Big 12, no disrespect, it's just perceived in a way that is very unfavorable here in the Southeastern Conference. So I think Auburn definitely on upset alert. You got the away game. Big question mark around Jackson Arnold. I think that Dave Aranda defense could absolutely give him fits. So while I did pick you to win the game, there is a high, probability of an upset here, and you are definitely on alert. For South Carolina, I think that it's possible just because, Shane Beamer gets off to such slow starts. If Lenore Sellers doesn't come out of the gate firing, maybe turns the ball over, if the pass rush just can't get in a groove and get home yet, I think that there is a low potential here for an upset for South Carolina, but I do not think that it is a very high potential. Like I said, low potential here on this game, but South Carolina, you are on upset alert. Georgia Tech, low potential here as well. But there is uncertainty for Colorado. The quarterback at Colorado, Caden Salter, while we do know who is going to play for them, still uncertainty around how he's going to perform. Teams are a little bit closer in talent level, than some of these other matchups, but I do think Georgia Tech is going to win, like I said, but there is a low potential possibility for an upset here. Moving on to Tennessee. I've got that upset alert rated as medium. QB working in a new quarterback here. We all know what happened over the summer with Nico Imaliaba. Tennessee and UCLA just straight up trading quarterbacks out there. But how does the team respond to that? There are some other problems with some other players around fall camp. So what's the collective, what's the culture like? What's the spirit of that team in that locker room right now? I think we'll find out when they play Syracuse. And just because there's so many question marks around it, I've got them as a medium potential upset. So I expect Tennessee to win that game, but like I said, potential for an upset for sure. Nebraska, I think that I would put that upset potential as medium. I think they're just still kind of missing some juice, and they are playing a competitive opponent. So I expect them to win the game. A little bit better Jimmys and Joes, but it will be competitive. And if it's competitive, that always obviously means that you can lose. So in Boise State, to wrap up here, you are also on upset alert, medium potential for an upset. No Ashton Genty, and don't underestimate Alex Golesh there at USF. He's got a solid team down there, and they can definitely bite you. You're a lot more, you're closer, in talent than you would like to admit. So definitely possible for an upset. You got to go pretty far across the country to their place. So definitely got an upset, there waiting to happen. So for week 1, that's all that we have on upset alert. I appreciate any of you who listened to the podcast this week. We will be back next week with reactions to all of the week 1 chaos that we are about to witness. And we will have predictions for week 2 as well. So until next time, thanks for listening to this episode of the College Football Podcast.